That's right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming at this relatively short notice. But I think you will all be aware of the Four Corners program last night, in which we saw shameful and appalling practices in relation to young Australians, predominantly Aboriginal Australians. I'm here today with my colleagues, Commissioner Megan Mitchell, who is the first Federal Commissioner for Children, who will be speaking to you briefly, and also by Mick Gooda, the Commissioner for Social Justice and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. It is an informal press conference, and we basically want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions, because there has been so much interest in this issue, and I'd just like, if I may, to make some preliminary comments. Firstly, like everyone else, I was really shocked to the point of speechlessness, really, last night in watching the CCT footage that was used by the Four Corners program. I think we watched with horror, and it was interesting to have the opportunity then to talk about it very briefly on the Q&A program with Virginia Trioli. I woke this morning to a decision by the Prime Minister that he would establish a Royal Commission into the juvenile detention system in the Northern Territory as a joint Northern Territory and Commonwealth exercise. We greatly welcome this initiative. As you'll all be aware, Royal Commissions often are announced after a long and bitter public discussion and debate about the need, but we've seen, I think, genuine leadership in moving very quickly on a matter that concerns most Australians. So we welcome this decision to hold a Royal Commission, and we stand ready at the Australian Human Rights Commission to assist with this exercise in any way that we possibly can. A great deal has yet to be determined. The Commission must be set up with terms of reference, a Commissioner must be appointed, and we need to understand what the scope and opportunities for this Commission will be. So there's much to be determined as a matter of course for the Prime Minister and for Cabinet. We, however, at the Human Rights Commission have had a very long history in responding to questions of juvenile detention. We've advocated, as have many others in the community, both children's commissioners, human rights bodies and the media, journalists in the Northern Territory. We have been reporting on this question of Indigenous incarceration, particularly of juveniles, for many, many years, and we have had many, many reports that have outlined the disproportionate effect on Aboriginal children, but also on the appalling conditions in which they are held. One that I would like to make a brief reference to is that by Pat Anderson, Little Children is Sacred. That had an impact at the time, along with the inquiry or Royal Commission 25 years ago into Aboriginal deaths in custody. But I think we, with this CCT footage today or yesterday, must come to terms with a failure to address a problem that we've all understood has existed for a long time. I'd like to say just a little about the international community's interest in this matter. As you will be aware, Australia undergoes every 4 years a review by other states, a peer review of Australia's compliance with the international human rights treaties to which we're a party. They are, of course, the underpinning treaties for the mandate for the Australian Human Rights Commission and for my role as President. Under the UPR process, which has recently been held in Geneva in November last year and again in March, the international community spoke with considerable interest and firmness and information about, in particular, the incarceration of Aboriginal Australians and raised, some states in particular, the question of juvenile incarceration. I mention this because it is a matter that is understood within the international community, and it's a matter which affects the standing that we have in that community. We've been a good international citizen, but over the last 15 years or so, we've seen a real decline in our commitment to the rule of law and to human rights in Australia. And the Human Rights Council is alert to the particular concerns for Indigenous Australians. So, in short, the Australian Human Rights Commission supports a Royal Commission, possibly in a staged approach, but these are all matters for the Prime Minister. But clearly the urgent priority concerns the conditions and conduct and culture of the Don Dale Juvenile Detention Centre. And if I may then, I'll turn first to Commissioner Megan Mitchell to tell us about her own experience in visiting that centre and her long experience in talking about the detention of juveniles by Australian institutions. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Gillian. As you could see by my reaction in last night's show, I was deeply shocked and moved about what was happening to these kids in this facility. And I just, it's unbelievable to think that these things are happening in Australia today. I have visited a number of juvenile facilities across Australia only recently as part of the work that I'm doing to understand the extent to which Australia is placed to ratify a protocol attached to a convention that we're a party to, the Convention Against Torture and Other Inhumane Treatment. Now, many facilities are well placed, but I have to say, in comparison, the Don Dale Centre up in the Northern Territory is coming from a very low base. The conditions are extremely poor. It's an ageing facility designed as an adult maximum security prison. My lasting impression is one of cage wire and cement. Then it's not a suitable place for children to be managed and cared for. In addition, as you could see from the footage, there are cultural issues in that facility and in the juvenile justice system, which means there's a pervasive sense of violence and aggression, use of force routinely, and isolation used routinely. This all creates a powder keg in there where incidents like the ones you have seen are much more likely to occur. So I too welcome this inquiry. But I also would say, ask the Northern Territory Government to look quickly at whether this facility should continue and also to address the conditions and treatment of the young people in it. Thank you.
I'm finding this is just hard. Our people have known about things like this. We've advocated so hard, and to just see it laid bare in front of us last night must be a wake-up call to everyone in Australia that something's got to be done about the way we lock our people up in this country, and particularly the way we lock our kids up. What we saw last night is an absolute disgrace. What we saw this morning was decisive leadership from a Prime Minister who I think cares. What we've got to do now is make sure this makes a difference. Gillian mentioned the Royal Commission. 25 years ago, it handed down its report. We have 3 times as many people in custody as we did then. Pat Anderson and Rex Wild's report, Little Children Are Sacred. You know, they talked about, unless we address the situation of our kids in communities in the Northern Territory, we might as well build big fences around Alice Springs and Darwin to keep them out. They had 98 recommendations in that report, the first of which was about engagement with the Aboriginal community. And we saw an intervention that totally wiped out any opportunity for that to happen. So this is a hard day for me. It's a hard day for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think it's a hard day for all Australians to come to terms with this. So I try to be positive and think something good's got to come out of this. And if it doesn't, we'll be judged as a nation and a very poor nation. There's been 3 inquiries into this Don Dale Centre. Yet we still see this thing happening. The modus operandi of the Northern Territory government is this: shoot the messenger, discredit the report, and demonise these kids. So people out in the street think it's okay for that treatment to occur. Well, I'll tell you right now, it's not okay for that to happen to any children in this country, be they Aboriginal, be they non-Aboriginal. And I think this is an opportunity for this government to stand up, and I would hate to see it become a political football. The opposition has got to stand up here and say enough's enough. Start listening to us, because if they don't, we're going to see more repeats of this happening. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you very much. That's a very powerful response that I think reflects the views of a horrified Australia. And now, if I may ask you, did you have any questions that you'd like us to answer? Yes.
I do, Commissioner. We've all seen the vision. Can you tell me, were laws broken by the prison guards? And if laws were broken, do you want those people to be charged?
Well, I can certainly say that on what I have seen on that footage, and without any further examination, it looks as though laws have been broken. But perhaps I could begin with one law, and that is that as a matter of international law, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, no child should be detained except as a matter of last resort. And I think we need to start with that one. Why is it that we have, I believe, 1,000 children detained in detention facilities throughout Australia? That's one question. The next is how they're being treated. In some facilities, as I know Megan can attest, we have well-trained staff with good programs in parts of Australia. In others, we have disgraceful facilities that are little better than some of the prisons we've seen internationally, and the Prime Minister himself has mentioned Abu Ghraib. It's not too extreme a statement to make when you see the pictures of a hooded young man held in isolation in a chair for, I understand, spitting. Now, your question, should we have criminal prosecutions? If you or I were to treat our children in this way, we would be prosecuted criminally. These children are in a relationship with the state or the territory that is essentially a parental relationship. A strong duty of care, a stronger duty of care exists in relation to the children that the state chooses to incarcerate. Where there's been a failure in relation to those children, then the full force of the criminal law should apply. But I have to say that obviously very carefully, because all I have seen is that footage. But I have, along with Megan and many of my colleagues here at the Commission, including Mick, been to detention centre facilities, asylum seeker facilities, or facilities where we've held people with cognitive disabilities and other forms of detention. So we do see conditions varying significantly around Australia. And one thing that could emerge from this exercise is a much more coherent national set of standards, proper training and proper sets of objectives. But frankly, I think we'd like to see, and I know Mick can speak to this, a much greater investment in communities, justice reinvestment. Instead of building new prisons, which of course is being proposed for New South Wales, we don't need new prisons, we need new approaches to dealing with those people who are in breach of the law.
What do you think the scope of this inquiry should be?
Well, I think that's an important question. I think the immediate need is to address what's going on at Don Dale, and therefore I would say we need some form of interim report that deals with this particular facility, to try to understand why the earlier 3 inquiries were not successful. The advantage of a Royal Commission, of course, is that they will have much more significant powers of subpoenaing evidence. They can search in the dark corners. But we don't want that Royal Commission to be one that takes months or years to report. That clearly is not going to be sufficient. So what I would suggest, and this is very early to be doing this, but what I would suggest is that we have some sort of relatively quick interim report in relation to the immediate problem, a final report, but then maybe move to a second phase where we look at the detention facilities for children nationally, and we can then get a fairer picture. Where some facilities, I understand, particularly in Victoria, Parkville, has a reporting system. It's well regarded, staff are well trained. The objective is to get these children back on their feet again as law-abiding and fruitful Australian citizens. That's what we all want, and that's what the criminal justice system is designed to deliver. So we have good facilities, and we have good practices and good staff, but we also have appalling facilities. And somehow or another in the Northern Territory, there has been a long and consistent history, and therefore the focus needs in the short term to be on those facilities.
Commissioner, your colleague, Mr. Gooda, mentioned the importance of shining a light on Indigenous youth incarceration rates. If there is some good to come from this, what would you perceive that as?
Well, I think that I'm hoping that we have some informed and evidence-based report that can allow us to move forward to deal with young people, but certainly in the Northern Territory, overwhelmingly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, to take a more humane and long-term approach to managing these people. These children are damaged, but some of them can be dangerous. They are angry, and they can lash out. They've committed, in some cases, some very nasty offences. We can't avoid that. So there must be capacities to use force. There must be rules that regulate this. But I think what I'd like to see come out of it is a greater consideration of the sorts of things Mick has been talking about, justice reinvestment. Think of other ways of managing these situations where children go off the rail. But remember that we are dealing with children. We're dealing with children. And therefore, we must take a different approach in relation to them. But of course, we know the entire criminal justice system is designed to rehabilitate, but children are young enough to be able to do it very, very effectively. And when we abdicate that responsibility simply to an institutional warehousing of these children, and we put them in the care and control of people who manifestly do not have the skills to care for them and to assist them move on, then we were obviously in trouble. So what do I think is the outcome? I think short term, probably closing that facility, but longer term, really thinking hard, bringing in the experts and goodwill around Australia to think of how we can combat the social isolation, the broken environments from which these children come, and to ensure that they do not commit criminal offences in the future and have fruitful lives as Australian citizens. I think we'd all agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually at Alice Springs
Good.
myself.
Yes.
So I've probably seen a lot of that firsthand. So
Yes.
I know there's a lot of people back in the Territory, friends, family, colleagues and stuff that are eagerly waiting to see what will come out.
Well, can I suggest, and I know Mick wants to say something, but I did hear a radio interview with, again, a Territorian who was actually pulling together people like you to say, we're not going to allow this to happen in our name any longer, and we're going to do something about it. So I think, again, we come back, despite the reports, despite the evidence, despite the visits and the monitoring and the media attention, what has made the difference is CCT footage released by, in this case, the Four Corners program. So if that's brought this matter into the full blaze of light, fantastic. But now let's listen to more positive minds like yours and now Mick's about what can be done in the future.
We've had inquiry after inquiry, and the Royal Commission is an absolute failure. The Little Children Are Sacred report, the implementation of those 98 recommendations has been an absolute failure. We've got to look at the underlying causes why these kids are in prison. How does the justice system treat them? What leads to the offending? I'm all for a safe. I think my whole focus around incarceration has been creating a safe community. Because we create a safe community, people aren't offending and then therefore going to jail. But there's something happening here. I refuse to believe our kids are the most criminal kids in the world almost. I just refuse to believe that, as I refuse to believe our people are the most criminal. And again, I've been doing this for 6.5 years in this position, and for probably 20 years before that. The government's got to listen to us. They've got to create a relationship how we can create an environment where this offending's not occurring, where our kids are getting to school. The early childhood, we know the evidence that you can tell offending behaviour in kids in year one. They're the kids who aren't socialised, aren't going to preschool. This is where the effort's got to be. But they funded all these family centres out of a national partnership agreement, built these great buildings. Go to Fitzroy Crossing and look at the building Junie Oscar works out of. And then now the IAS, they all got defunded, you know, and we often sit back and wonder what's going on here. And the simple thing is, government doesn't listen to us. And I'll call again till I probably die, or it actually happens, is for government to create a good and honest relationship between itself and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Because I fear we're not going to be told anything much different, except in this Don Dale incident. And the only thing I can say about that, someone's got to be held accountable for what we saw. Whether it's the people who perpetrated that or whether it's the politicians who stood by and let it happen. After 3 inquiries, someone's got to be accountable. And I think Aboriginal people are demanding that.
One more question on that point then. Last night on the program, we saw a young man, Dylan Boller, who's still in custody. What do you want to happen for him now? Isn't it a priority that he gets looked after straight away?
He's in adult prison now. Look, one of the first things that went through my mind when I watched that litany of poor treatment over many years that Dylan had experienced was, how does a young person recover from this? And I absolutely agree with you. He needs therapeutic support to recover from his treatment over many years. And I think this is something I hope that the inquiry will be looking at too. What is our obligation to these kids who've been abused, assaulted, demeaned, and whose rights have been disregarded for so many years? Thanks.
Question for me. The corrections minister in the Northern Territory has been dismissed. Is that a step in the right direction? What's your reaction to that?
Oh, look, I think that's a part of what I mentioned around accountability, but I think there's a few other people up there who've disregarded the reports. And it's, look, I lived in the Northern Territory. I was there when the intervention started. I think it's about time politicians in the Northern Territory realise they're part of Australia, and these conventions that Gillian mentioned, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Treaty Against Torture and Inhumane Treatment, they have a role to uphold those treaties and obligations as well as Australia. So I think the whole of Northern Territory needs to look after itself, look at itself. And I've got to say, the treatment, you know, of the Northern Territory, if it was an Aboriginal organisation who disregarded so many reports and behaved the way they do, they would have appointed administrators long ago. So maybe the government needs to think about that as an option.
On an international law front, that was mentioned by Megan earlier, the OPCAT.
Yes.
Governments have sort of talked about ratifying that. Do you think that would be an important legislative step, and could that provide some sort of protection against instances like that?
Yes, and we support the ratification of this particular procedure under the Torture Convention, which would set up a national monitoring mechanism to review all detention centres, and it would actually deal with a lot of matters that are profound concern to the Commission, and that is the administrative detention of those with cognitive disabilities, asylum seekers, people on 501 visa cancellations, and of course those in juvenile detention facilities. The signing of OPCAT was one of the major points made by other states in the Human Rights Council's review of Australia. Now I should say that Australia ratified this, signed this treaty something like 9 years ago. We've done almost nothing since. But I understand it's one of the first things I did as president was to ask the attorneys general around Australia if they had any objection to going forward with this. And the answer I got back was no, we were ready to go. Some states have had legislation in place for some time, but there's been a dragging of the chain. And I think one of the outcomes, the question's been asked, what do we think the outcomes would be? I think one of them would be to ensure a speedy ratification of that procedure so that we can have a national process with proper standards and proper monitoring. I think that will be a very, very major way forward, not only on this particular issue, but on many other aspects of detention generally.
Is there a hope that this incident might be the inspiration for that?
Well, you know, when I talk to Mick, one can be very in despair that we've had inquiries, we've had reports, we've had recommendations, we've had calls by the United Nations, we've had rapporteurs telling us our facilities are in breach of the Torture Convention, and nothing has happened. But I, as an international lawyer, am eternally optimistic, and I do believe that maybe we have this happen chance of appalling CCT footage and a Prime Minister who's been willing to exercise strong leadership and to do so immediately without engaging in a long wrangle to get a Royal Commission set up. So I think we are in a good place to have a proper rule of law based inquiry and hopefully some recommendations which will be adopted by the Prime Minister and Cabinet in due course.
We also saw this morning an asylum seeker forcibly removed from Melbourne immigration and put on a plane involving a lot of police. Is there a normalisation in this country of quite brutal administrative detention? Do you see that as a broader issue?
I do. It's a broader question, rather off topic from today, and I don't want to distract from the importance of today. But there's no doubt in my mind that we have a tolerance for detention without trial, without access to the courts, with a very high reliance on ministerial discretion, which is neither compellable nor reviewable. This is a trend in Australia over the last 10 years, and we're seeing it playing out in a lot of areas: sex offenders, terrorism, 501, visa cancellation, citizenship allegiance issues. We're seeing it over and over again. And I would make the broad point that when you chip away at the rule of law and basic rights, ultimately you falter profoundly in the way that we're seeing with the culture that has allowed this to occur in the Northern Territory. So it's a broader point, but I do want to bring us back to what's brought us here today, and that is the absolutely shocking situation of these young Australians, typically Aboriginal, after decades of reporting, not only by bodies such as this, and by commissioners such as Mick Gooda and Megan Mitchell, but also by the media. They've been reporting this, but it also hasn't cut through. Maybe this time the dramatic impact of television footage to the wide Australian population could cut through and could have an outcome.
I think you probably touched on it partly. Some of this video seems to have been shot with the full knowledge of the prison guards themselves, who maybe they think they were doing nothing wrong. How does that, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it underscores the problem that this is a culture. This is more than just rules, regulations, and policies. It's a culture that has allowed these particular officers to assume that what they were doing was acceptable. It may even be that some footage has been destroyed. If that's the case, it's astonishing that this has been left behind. Now, how this was gathered, it must have been officially done because it was in a cell, a padded cell, at least in some of the footage that I saw. It wasn't done with a private camera, it was done with official CCT cameras. So the facts will emerge, and that's why it's been so important that the Prime Minister has moved so quickly. The sooner we get an accurate understanding of the facts here, the sooner it will be possible to not only change the practices, but also to look at the much more profound question of what is the culture that allows this treatment of young people, and as Mick has said, to start to look in a more sympathetic way as to the underlying causes that have led to this unprecedented incarceration of young, typically Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and a level of incarceration that I understand is exceptional globally, not just for Australia.
Any final questions for Gillian? Any final questions?
Well, I really appreciate your coming and your responding as quickly as you have done to this. Thank you very much indeed.
I think that's it.
That's the whole thing.